views expressed on this program are those of the host, guest, and callers, and are not necessarily those of this station, its management, or other advertisers. You're listening to Transformation Talk Radio.
Welcome to Grassroots Advocacy Radio, where your host, Marcia Padilla-Goad, will leave you feeling empowered, aware, and knowledgeable of what may be impacting your lives and communities politically, but without taking a political position. Get ready, really understand and discover the power you hold as a voter and how you can use your voice to educate lawmakers and influence pending legislation. Grassroots Advocacy Radio is a space for conversations that will educate, empower, influence, and engage listeners, no matter what you may be for or against, or even of a particular political party affiliation. Now is your time to find your voice and share it with others. And now, here is your host, Marcia.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marcia Padilla-Goad, and you are listening to Grassroots Advocacy Radio on Transformation Talk Radio. Join our conversation for the next hour as we talk about the evolving opioid crisis in our nation and how it is impacting families. Today's show is the first of a three-part series on the opioid epidemic in our nation. This show will focus on the epidemic's impact on children and the grandparents and other relatives who step up to care for them. According to the American Psychological Association, the opioid epidemic is taking a heavy toll on a particularly vulnerable group, the children of those with substance use disorders. Many of these children are being placed with relatives or into the foster care system, which in many states is struggling to keep up with demand. This crisis is also taking a toll on grandparents and other relatives, people who we call the silent heroes who step in to protect their families. As opioid overuse continue to surge, these families are in desperate need for support and services. Joining me for today's show to talk about this important issue and to educate the public about policies and resources available to support their needs are Jaya Peterson-Lent, Deputy Executive Director at Generations United, and Joanne Claw, a family law attorney and a grandparent caregiver who is raising her granddaughter after the loss of her daughter, Emily, from an opioid overdose in 2016. I would like to welcome you both to Grassroots Advocacy Radio.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Absolutely, and it's my pleasure. This was a very difficult show to put together because of such strong emotions behind it. I think every day, we're seeing these news reports that come across the television screen about, people dying, people being found, children finding their parents. But I think, we have an obligation, to those of us who have the expertise to share or have resources to share that with the public. Joanne, I got choked up reading your story. And, as a parent, I can't imagine what it feels like losing a family member, especially your own child. In your case, you lost your daughter, Emily, as I mentioned, in 2016 to the opioid crisis. Can you tell us your story? How did you get to this? How did your family get to this point?
It's been over 26 months, I think, and I still don't think I understand how my family got to this point. I got married in my 30s, and I had two children. I had Emily in 1994, and I had my daughter Diane in 1996 at the ages of 37 and 39 years old, as the OBGYN say, advanced maternal age. And after about 4 years, I left my daughter's father, my husband, and we got divorced. There was some abuse and in the relationship. And about a year after we separated, he was trying to get more and more custody. And when he did not prevail in court, his behaviors got pretty erratic, and the court ended up only letting him have professionally supervised visits only until he would get counseling. So he decided instead to never see our children again in the summer of 2000. And the same weekend he kind of decided to stop seeing them again, my father passed away. So in one weekend, my daughters lost their father, their grandfather, and both their father's parents, their other two grandparents, because they stopped seeing them too. So my ex had no contact with Emily whatsoever for 16 years before she died, except mailing her a bizarre letter when she graduated from high school. Wow. So I think that was a huge loss in Emily's life and my other daughter's life that she struggled with. And when she had, when she was in elementary school, she had ADHD. She took medication for that for about a year, and then we took her off that because it seemed to be affecting her. And then in high school, she had some normal high school problems. She was an honor student. She was a cheerleader. She was very athletic. She picked bad boys to go out with, and she had some bad behavior in the house with me, and she had been diagnosed with anxiety and oppositional defiant disorder. But she functioned fairly well in spite of all that. And then after she graduated from high school, she started at a local community college. And that is where I believe a guy she started dating first introduced her to heroin. Wow. And I did not know about it. She was not living with me that year. And she called me, I think she started in August or September, and she called me the following spring in May to ask me to meet her and told me she was addicted to heroin and she needed help to get off of it. And I was absolutely stunned. I could not understand how it happened. And that just started 4 years of the horror of active addiction and her trying to detox, rehab, jail, detox, rehab. And then she got pregnant in 2015. She did not find out when she was actively using again. She did not find out she was pregnant till she was over 5 months pregnant and was doing about 20 bags of heroin a day at the time. So she decided she needed to get clean and stay safe to have her daughter. And she had to go on a medically assisted treatment program because the baby would have died in utero if she had stopped cold turkey. So she went on that program and she was clean for almost a year. And on the day she died, for whatever reason, on her way to work, she stopped and called a dealer and purchased something. And we subsequently found out it was 100% pure fentanyl. The package she used did not have any heroin in it. And it killed her instantly. And so we found her. They found her about 18 hours later in her car, dead. And Carter was 9 months old at the time, my granddaughter. And I've been raising her ever since that night.
Wow. It really is. It really is a deep story. And, you know, unless you're in that situation, you really don't understand the full impact of it. So, you know, unfortunately, as you mentioned, Emily passed. And so you have now been raising your 3-year-old granddaughter, Carter.
Yes.
And you've certainly stepped into that natural protective role, which is beneficial for your granddaughter and something that we would actually talk about a bit later in the show. But I would like to know what were some of the challenges that you faced as an older person who found herself suddenly parenting again and also in the midst of a crisis. That could not have been an easy task.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways it's delayed me really grieving or 100% dealing with my daughter Emily's death, because Emily left around 3:30 in the afternoon on Saturday to go to work. And the last thing I had Carter, I was holding Carter, and they lived with me at the time. And the last thing she said was, "Mommy, I love you." And I said, "I love you too." And then that night around 6 p.m., I got the call that she was missing. And the next day we found out she was dead. And pretty much from that second forward, every minute of my day has been consumed with making sure Carter's safe and taking care of her. I was almost 60 when it happened, and now I'm 62 with a 3-year-old. And I would say one of the biggest challenges is, you know, just being older and having a child that little. Your energy level certainly isn't what it would be if you were in your 20s or 30s. I thought I had it hard when Emily and Diane were little and I was 37 and 39, but that was nothing compared to keeping up with Carter. She's a very active little girl. And so that was an immediate, and then the immediate economic challenge was we did not have daycare for Carter when Emily was alive because Emily worked nights and I watched Carter at nights. So immediately within 3 weeks of Emily's death, I started paying $15,600 worth of daycare the first year out of my pocket that I had no real ability to pay except from cash flow. And so that economic reality was very present, and we could not get any help for that because of the way they calculate assistance for people with daycare. They count your whole household income, and they counted my daughter Diane, who at the time was a junior at American University. They counted her work-study income as her part of her financial aid package as part of our household income to put us over the limit to have disqualify us for any help with Carter's daycare. So that was an immediate challenge.
Wow. So, and that's something we're also going to talk about a little bit more, the fact that many grandparents in your situation are just getting by. So Jaya, I read your article, and I think in reading your article, it helped me to look at this crisis from a very different angle. We're all focusing on the tip of the iceberg, which is the addiction and the overdose death, which is a significant factor. So much so that, we aren't able to effectively tackle the other issues that lie beneath the surface. And they are pretty complicated issues. Jaya, can you tell us about your organization, Generations United?
Sure. Generations United is a national nonprofit advocacy organization that looks at issues that connect the generations, that different generations have in common. And we are home to the National Center on Grandfamilies, which is the term we use for families where grandparents or other relatives are raising children. Mm-hmm. And we do advocacy on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., provide information, resources, and technical assistance to those that help grandfamilies across the country, and directly to caregivers that are interested in learning more about supports and services and policies that can help them. And we also have a network of caregivers across the country that we call our Grand Voices Network, that we provide training for to elevate their voices so that policymakers and other leaders are aware of both the challenges that they face, but also the strengths that they bring by stepping in to care for children and keep them out of the foster care system.
Wow. So we are actually going to take our first break. And when we return, we'll continue our discussion. You are listening to Grassroots Advocacy Radio with Marcia Padilla-Goad. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we will continue our conversation with Jaya and Joanne about the impact of the opioid crisis and their advocacy for families. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Goddess-like shamanic healer Bree Gibbs guides us through the ascending worlds, bringing forth knowledge and truth. As a light creator, she is here to provide new information needed at this time in our evolution. Join Bree as she shares messages from guides, spirits, ascended masters, goddesses, and more. Tune in Thursdays at 3 p.m. Pacific for the Dr. Bree Show, The Goddess Emergence, and live the authentic life.
Are you tired of being tired? Hi, I'm Mary Jane Mack. Did you know the adrenal glands, the workhorse of the body? They are the means by which you position yourself in life for whatever comes your way. Tiny but mighty, producing hormones the body uses to promote energy and vitality. These adrenals determine how you respond to stress, and when depleted, the body loses its ability to function powerfully when we need it most. The much-needed adrenaline or epinephrine is not available for emergency situations. Cortisone and cortisol, the longer-acting anti-stress adrenal hormones, can also become depleted due to the pace of our everyday lives. We overwork and undernutrition, our most powerful ally that helps us to live the lives we desire. We are able to determine the optimum function of the adrenals and put your system back in balance. Contact us today to feel powerfully energized at 888-777-4232 or visit us at maryjanemack.com.
Ignite your inner magic on Grow Your Soul Radio with Jane Matanga. Tune in each month on Transformation Talk Radio as host Jane Matanga explores how to overcome your fears to help you gain the inspiration you need to awaken your path to joy. Learn the way to life mastery and the enlightened path with Grow Your Soul Radio. For more information on Jane Matanga and her work, visit enlightened-path.com.
Hi, I'm Laura Meeks, and the most common problem that my clients face is all work and no play. This is why I created Fly High Living. I help you develop a balanced life plan and guide you to a place where you love to wake up in the morning.
Call 888-666-1570 or go to flyhighliving.com to sign up for the 4-week Flight Plan for Life course.
If you have been struggling with fear and anxiety, you know how debilitating these emotions can be. You constantly doubt yourself, you can't make decisions, and feel more and more insecure and stuck. Dr. Friedman Schaub's book, The Fear and Anxiety Solution, will provide you with the insights and tools to break through these challenges. Through a step-by-step process, Dr. Schaub explains how to resolve the subconscious root causes of fear and anxiety and build a strong foundation of inner peace and confidence. Visit www.thefearandanxietysolution.com and get your copy now.
Order your copy of Dr. Friedman Schaub's The Fear and Anxiety Solution today. Visit thefearandanxietysolution.com for more information.
We are back on Grassroots Advocacy Radio. I'm your host, Marcia Padilla-Goad. Joining me today is Jaya Peterson-Lent, Deputy Executive Director at Generations United, and Joanne Claw, a family law attorney and grandparent caregiver. Joanne, you mentioned a little bit about some of what you struggled with in the beginning, caring for your granddaughter. What was the hardest part of providing care for her immediately following Emily's death? And I think you mentioned the daycare.
Yeah, the daycare. And the other thing was, as I indicated before, my own daughters were 4 and 5 when their dad stopped, ever seeing them again. So I had single-parented 365 days a year for 16 years with my other 2 daughters, and I'm still single. I've never remarried. I live by myself. So right away, I was back kind of at the beginning with a little baby, starting it all over again by myself at a much older age. So it was very hard for me to adjust. It was a big adjustment that I couldn't just leave my house when I wanted to,
yes,
or go to the store or do anything like that, because once again, I had a tiny child that I was taking care of 24/7. And that was a very big adjustment. And I think, to be honest, it was almost like remote control, because I think in the beginning with grief, you're just literally numb for many months. And Emily had been doing so well, and she almost made it out of this horror. She had been clean for almost a year, and it just kind of, here you are having the worst thing that can ever happen to you, I think, as a human, is your own child die. And at the same time, I have the baby that I now need to care for. The father at the time was still only allowed to have supervised contact, and that was not an option for him to be, for my granddaughter to be at that household. So that was probably the immediate challenge. Was, I think I really just put one foot in front of the other without seeing that far down the track, was kind of how I went every day.
Right. Right. You describe exactly what Jaya mentioned in her article about grandparents suddenly finding themselves in social isolation. Um, and additionally, as you mentioned before, a lot of them are just getting by because they are living on a fixed income. Jaya, do you want to tell us a little bit more about social isolation and what you have found among your network?
Absolutely. And I think social isolation and some issues related to grief really can go hand in hand in this case. And Joanne spoke so eloquently about her grief with the loss of her own daughter. In addition to that loss, what we see with so many grand family caregivers is there are multiple pieces of grief. There's the social isolation piece, which may be related to loss of peer friendships, because while you may have been going to movies or doing things with your peer-to-peer friends that they want to do, now you're going to, doctor's appointments for the children and, attending to the children's needs where there aren't those peers there. So there's that loss of connection. There can be the loss of the traditional grandparent role. So we all envision that when we're grandparents that we'll get to, take the grandchildren for a couple of hours, give them candies and cookies, sugar them up, and send them home to their parents to take care of them when they're sugared up. Well, no, now you are the disciplinarian, and there's some grief around loss of that traditional grandparent role. There may also be loss of the secure retirement that you had been saving for or planning for. So there's a whole series of pieces of grief that we see grand families going through beyond the loss of that adult child, whether they are deceased or if that adult child is still living but is struggling with addiction or other issues.
Wow. And how exactly is your organization helping to connect families so that they can support each other?
Absolutely. So we have multiple roles. One piece is that we really elevate the voices of grand families and Capitol Hill. So we both seek their input so that we can do advocacy and elevate their voices with policymakers, but we also identify and help train caregivers themselves to be sharing their story in effective ways so that policymakers can hear it and make changes. And through that network, we connect family members to our grand family caregivers to learn from each other and empower each other with lessons in terms of what they've learned around advocacy. We also have a series of resources on our website, and one of our most popular can be accessed directly at grandfactsheets.org.
Yes.
And they are fact sheets for every state where grand families can learn about what support group or other service or support is available in their community so they can connect with others like them that are close by.
That's great. And I actually visited your website, grandfamilies.org, and I was really pleased to see the state-by-state compilation of resources to help families. And for our listeners who are seeking support in every way, please visit grandfamilies.org, and you can, to help you access information in your state. Joanne, what kind of guidance do you offer to families now stepping into this role? Suddenly finding themselves to become parents, becoming parents again?
Well, one thing we did in our community was I just kind of through word of mouth, and then there's a place here, Highmark Insurance Company has a place called the Caring Place, and it's CARING, and it's a place that helps children who have lost a loved one, whether it's a parent, an aunt, an uncle. They go there and they have, it's confidential, and they meet for so many weeks, and they do an art project together. They do a quilt, and they finish. And the Caring Place was getting so many more people, children coming to it because of the death of parents from opioid use, that they ended up reaching out to have community meetings for grandparents and families that were raising children going through this. So I met a lot of people through that. and through networking. My daughter Emily was very public about speaking out about addiction, even though she was not a public speaker like my other daughter and I are. But she spoke publicly and always said that addiction thrives in the darkness and dies in the light. So it was important to me to continue to speak out for her. And I started getting contacted by reporters. We were very public in our obituary how Emily lost her life and lost her battle with addiction. And I started speaking. I'm on a committee for the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, Children and Youth Subcommittee on Grandparents Raising Grandchildren. And we were fortunate in Pennsylvania last year. We passed 2 different laws to assist grandparents, one for emergency temporary guardianship and one to help fund and establish a kinship navigator program in Pennsylvania where people can call an 800 number or log in, people like me, and try to find out what help is out there because there was no central place. I'm a family law attorney, and I had no idea what to do or how to go about getting help for the different areas I needed it in. And then a friend of mine I've met through this public speaking on opioids, does a lot of work, and she started a grandparent. She said, what would be helpful? And I said, well, a grandparent support group would be great. And she started one in New Cumberland, Pennsylvania. We were meeting on the first Thursday of every month. There's about maybe 8 to 12 people that come. And then the other grandmother said, we don't want to wait a whole month. And now we need to meet more frequently. So now we meet on the first and third Thursday of every month. And that's not all from opioid use. There's people from other issues that are raising their grandchildren too, but that's been helpful. So basically, a lot of people will reach out to me because I've been in the news and I've been public speaking a lot of places. I go and speak and do lectures on it on panels all the time. And depending what their specific problem is, I try to direct them as best I can. But it's hard because there isn't really a central place. And they did, I think it was Senator Casey and Senator Susan, I forget her name, from Maine. That's terrible.
Collins. They passed a bipartisan legislation for this kinship navigator program and to help grand families. And there was money that each state could apply for, and Pennsylvania applied for it. And that's how they received a grant. They're working on that. And my understanding is that should be up and running in July. And I'm on a good workshop with the Secretary of Aging in Pennsylvania, has a grandparents workshop, and I participate on that with a number of other secretaries of different departments in Pennsylvania and a number of other grand family members and other people that are knowledgeable. And we're just trying to work as we're trying to catch up to have services to meet the needs, because the need was there, of course, way before there was any help to help with the need. And another thing is like respite care, like, people that don't have a break or I can't go anywhere at night without hiring a babysitter when I'm already paying daycare during the day. And when you're 62, I love Carter. She's 3, but sometimes you need a little time out. So that's what I basically just try on case by case basis to help people as I can, direct them places. But like I said, we're kind of just in the infancy stage of getting some stuff up and running here to help families more. But the best part about all this is every one of these kids is in a loving family and did not have to be a burden to the foster care system. And that's what we keep trying to convince legislators. If they could give a little financial help to our families, it would save them an incredible amount of money than if these children had gone into the foster care system.
And I'll just build on that and saying that we've actually crunched the data. So we know that by stepping up to keep children out of foster care and safely with family, grandparents and other relatives actually save taxpayers an estimated $4 billion each year. So not only are they doing a service, of course, to children to keep them with family, but they're also doing a financial service to our country. And perhaps it's obvious to some, but by keeping children with family versus having them enter the foster care system, the data is very clear that children do better. Their outcomes are better with family. When you compare children in foster care with non-relatives to those with relatives, we see that they have more permanency, more stability. Right. They're more likely to have better behavior and mental health outcomes. They're more likely to stay connected to their brothers and their sisters. And they are more likely to have a sense of belonging. There's actually research that shows that children with relatives versus non-relatives are more likely to say that they always feel loved. So it's really compelling that we need to be supporting relatives who step into this role and keep children out of foster care because they're helping the kids and certainly the country.
Absolutely. I would love to continue on this specific topic once we return from our second break, because I would like to follow up about that on a recent article that I read from the American Psychological Association. So I'm Marcia Padilla-Goad, and you're listening to Grassroots Advocacy Radio. We are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Jaya and Joanne. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Learn and explore fascinating and practical uses of essential oils, how to use them, and how they can enhance your everyday life. The Oil Lounge was founded by 3 remarkable women with fascinating stories about how essential oils changed their lives. Tina and Laura from The Karmic Path have joined forces to educate the masses in the benefits of Young Living essential oils. For more information, visit theoillounge.com.
Are you ready to shift your current beliefs about death, from debilitating pain and loss? Follow Angie Corbett-Kuiper as she shares that through choice, present moment awareness, and keeping an open mind that anything is possible, even in death. Tune in to Beyond Proof Radio with Angie, redefining death and loss, every first and third Wednesday at 12 p.m. Pacific on TransformationTalkRadio.com. For more, visit AngieCorbettKuiper.com. Are you ready for unfiltered gratitude, unfiltered frequency, and unfiltered creation? Then don't miss Mike Murphy Unfiltered on TransformationTalkRadio.com Thursday from 12 to 2 Pacific Time, as Mike Murphy and a cast of powerful guests discuss and demonstrate the principles and practices of the creation frequency. Tune in to unleash the power of your mind. Open the immense energy of the heart to manifest an awesome life filled with true health, wealth, confidence, gratitude, and joy. Unfiltered truth and unfiltered frequency to uncover and let go of limiting beliefs and access your powerful intentions that resonate out into the universe with Mike Murphy Unfiltered. For more information on Mike and his work, visit his website at MikeMurphyUnfiltered.com.
Golden Otter Divinations Radio, where the metaphysical meets the mainstream with Autumn Seibel. Tune in the first Friday every month at 9 a.m. Pacific as Autumn, educator, health coach, and medium, explores metaphysical and mainstream strategies on how to elevate your level of conscious living. Draw in the abundance that is yours by divine right. For more information about working with Autumn, visit goldenotter.us. That's golden like the precious metal and otter like the precious animal.us.
On the cutting edge of the new mainstream, Christine Upchurch is passionate about bringing together science, psychology, and spirituality in a way that can be applied to our everyday lives for true transformation. The Christine Upchurch Show, stellar conversations to illuminate your journey, engages some of the most outstanding visionaries on the planet in lively dialogue to inspire you to become that bright light you're meant to be. Join Christine every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific Time on KKNW, AM 1150, and Transformation Talk Radio.
We're back on Grassroots Advocacy Radio. I'm your host, Marcia Padilla-Goad. Joining us today to talk about the opioid epidemic and its impact on families are Jaya Peterson-Lent and Joanne Claw. So, ladies, before we dive back into our conversation, can you both share your contact information with listeners and any kinds of events or activities that you have going on that listeners may wish to participate in?
Sure. This is Jaya Lent, and I can be reached at jlent, J-L-E-N-T, at gu.org. And Generations United has 2 websites that will be of interest. Our primary website is www.gu.org, as in Generations United. And then our other websites specifically focus solely on grand families is www.grandfamilies.org, and they both have a wealth of resources, including fact sheets specific to each state with resources for grand families locally.
And this is Joanne Clow, and I can be reached at my email is my last name, Clow, CLOUGH, and then the word law, LAW, altogether, clowlaw, at comcast.net. That's my email. So that's probably the best way to reach me.
Perfect. So, Jaya, you touched on an interesting topic about families raising, children in this crisis, and how it really is beneficial to the children who are, in the midst of this crisis. Can you continue that discussion?
Sure. So what we've seen with the opioid crisis is that, particularly in certain pockets of the country, we've seen sharp increases in the number of children that are entering foster care. And as we have seen that, we've seen foster care systems increasingly relying on grandparents and other relatives to care for the children. Now, the good news about that is that research is very clear that children do better with relatives on a number of levels. That reduces the trauma placing them with a familiar relative, among other very positive outcomes. But what's also important is that those relatives still need support to care for the children. And often what happens is child welfare systems will place children with relatives, but then the relatives won't get the same level of support services that non-relatives will get. And so one of our primary advocacy points is trying to provide more equity in that space, that it's the same children that have the same needs that cost the same amount to raise, but simply because there's a relative, that doesn't mean that there's some magical potion where they have the resources that non-relatives don't. In fact, relatives versus non-relatives, a non-relative foster parent has usually planned for months or even years to take on a child, whereas a grandparent or another relative very often gets a call in the middle of the night, and the child welfare system may be on the other line saying either take your grandchild or they're going to end up in foster care, and all of a sudden their world has turned around and they have no time to plan. So we really advocate for having more supports and services, either to make sure that that relative is given the opportunity to become a licensed foster parent and get the supports and services that a licensed foster parent would get, or be given more support so the child doesn't even have to legally come into the child welfare system, and they can get connected to supports and services in the community, so that the child never has to technically come into foster care in the first place. And our child welfare system really was not initially set up with relatives in mind. So there's been some effort to sort of retrofit it over the years, and we really need to rethink the way that system is set up so that we're doing a better job supporting relatives. And so there's a lot of things, but a few things I will highlight. Joanne mentioned earlier something called kinship navigator programs.
Yes.
And those are programs that are evolving across the country. There is some new funding that's been made available to states, territories, and tribes that apply for it. And that is for that locality to set up a line. It can be a website, but also we really strongly encourage, and it should be an actual phone line with a live person on the other end that's familiar with the challenges that grand families face, can do an intake call, an assessment, get a sense of their situation, and connect them to supports and services that will be helpful to them. So those kinship navigators are really to help them know what's out there, because one of the greatest challenges, I think Joanne highlighted, even as a family law attorney, she didn't know where to start. And she was pretty well connected. So imagine someone that doesn't even have that information. We just hear, where do I begin? And they're overwhelmed. So they sometimes even just need somebody to listen for a period of time and then connect to families or to services. And the other piece is that we really need to give caregivers information about their rights in terms of what benefits they're eligible for and should be pushing for if they need them. The right to become a licensed foster parent if they were connected, if the child welfare system placed this child with them, they should know that they have, equal access to becoming a licensed foster parent as a non-related person would be if they need that structure and support that comes with it. So those are just two key pieces of information that we try to convey to relatives when they step into this role.
Wow. Joanne, did you have any types of those types of limits when you started caring for your granddaughter? Were you looking to the system for help as well?
I tried to go to get the daycare subsidy. All I knew was many of my clients I do child support cases for get assistance with the child care, and it makes their daycare costs much lower. So I didn't even know where the place was that you went to apply. But I found it, and that's where I applied and found out the happy news of how they counted our household income, which disqualified us. And another issue is all of these different programs, some of them it depends on how they're funded. If they're run by the state, but they're federally funded. For instance, Emily, at the time of her death, had the public health insurance. She had Gateway Insurance in Pennsylvania because she was a waitress and her income was low enough. She qualified for that. And so did Carter as her child. When Emily passed away, Carter, I contacted Gateway and found out that Carter could still have her health insurance because they do not count my income or my other daughter's income as household income, because under that system, she qualified based on her deceased mother's income and her own income, because she gets a little bit of Social Security benefits from Emily's earnings history. So different places use different, programs or calculation methods to see if you're eligible or not. But in the first month and a half, and part of it was my grief because of my daughter having passed away, every place I went to apply for something, the birth father had already applied and had an appointment scheduled at Social Security, at WIC, at welfare, even though he didn't have custody and was only allowed to see the child 2 to 4 hours a week supervised. So every place I went, I had to get my court order. I got custody through and filing an action to intervene in my daughter and the birth father's custody action. I would have to take certified court orders to all these places to cancel his. So here you had an active heroin addict that knew how to apply for all the money instantly. And you had a family law attorney doing this for 34 years at the time who did not know about any of that stuff or where to get any of it. So that was kind of very frightening. And then sometimes there's also families that I have custody through the custody court system. Many people have it through Child Protective Services or Children and Youth, a place to children there. But we found in our grandparent support group, there are many families flying under the radar, and they do not have any legal custody, and the children are not placed with them through Child Protective Services. They just physically have them, and they have a terrible time getting anything accomplished because they don't legally have the parent power as a grandparent, like to enroll them in school or to take them to a doctor. And some of them just pretend, oh yeah, I have custody, I'll bring the order next time, and they get away with it. And they're terrified to either go after the other family in court because they don't want to rock the boat and risk losing the child, and they don't want to invite children and youth into their families that way either. So that's a whole other group of people out there. And that's where Pennsylvania, we did pass a temporary guardianship bill to try to help people like that. But still, many grand families are reluctant because they don't want to do anything that seems like they're stirring the pot with the remaining relatives that are still alive, because they just want to make sure the kids are safe and stay with them.
Wow.
And to add to that, I'll just emphasize that for every one child that's in foster care with a relative, there are actually 19 children being raised outside of the foster care system with a relative. And so many of those fall into that category that Joanne is talking about, where they've stepped in before the child welfare system ever got involved. They have no formal legal relationship with the child. And in a sense, because of that, they're penalized. They kept the child safe without going through that, but then they're penalized because they can't access supports and services. And they're fearful of going to the child welfare system because of the reputation of the child welfare system. And they don't, want to risk losing the child. And so we're really not good at helping families that step in to prevent a tragedy from happening. Once a tragedy has happened to a child, then the child welfare system steps in, and then you can get access to supports and services. But the prevention piece is really a newer concept in terms of providing funding for helping those before the tragedy happens with child welfare. And there is new legislation that passed last year that is taking some steps in that direction. But certainly there's a point of advocacy for states to become familiar with it and for caregivers to become familiar with it, to advocate that states take full advantage of it. It's called the Family First Prevention Services Act. And we have a good amount of information about that can be helpful to caregivers that are interested.
It's great. And that's something that we can talk about a little bit more in the last segment for the call to action. So we are actually going to take a quick break right now. And we will return and continue our discussion. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Tune in to the Astral Insider, your portal for adventure, insight, and growth with Fernando Albert. And get ready to tour the astral realm, expand your life in ways you've never imagined, and call in for the journey of your life with this world-renowned lucid dreamer, astral projectionist, psychic medium, and healer, Fernando Albert. This is every second and fourth Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific on TransformationTalkRadio.com.
If you have a sense that you are meant for more, join Heather Allison every third Tuesday at noon Pacific as she explores an ancient, forgotten energy within us and helps us access our original archetypal blueprint. The Golden Path will help you remember the key to unlocking your life, love, success, and magic you were meant for. A key to unlocking your golden path. Visit heather-allison.com.
Are you your story? Or can you change your story? Can you change what you believe to be true about yourself and your circumstances as part of your healing journey? What if you were to change your expectations? What if you were to invite ease and cooperation into every day and then step back and see what happens? It might just be easier. I'm Megan Edge, and I hope that you'll join me on my new radio show, Playing on the Edge, Radical Change with Ease, with my co-host Dr. Pat on Transformation Talk Radio. I look forward to seeing you there.
Want to find out more about Megan Edge? Visit her website at meganedge.ca.
People often ask, what does it mean to thrive? On Thrive by Jen Radio, it means body confidence, mind fulfillment, and soul synchronicity. Create synchronicity with God and learn as Jen shares action steps and real stories that will inspire you to be unstoppable in fulfilling your purpose. Tune in live each Monday at 8 a.m. Pacific on TransformationTalkRadio.com and visit JenniferZellup.com to thrive with Jen.
Welcome back to Grassroots Advocacy Radio. I'm your host, Marcia Padilla-Goad. Joining me today is Jaya Peterson-Lent, Deputy Executive Director at Generations United, and Joanne Claw, a family law attorney and caregiver to her 3-year-old granddaughter, Carter. So I recently read an article by the American Psychological Association, the American Psychology Association. And this article talks about behaviors among children in their classrooms as a result of the traumatic stress that they are experiencing because of this opioid crisis in their homes. In fact, educators are now seeing needs among their students that they don't always know how to handle. Have either of you worked in some way, in some capacity with educators or school administrators?
So certainly challenges related to the children's schooling for grand families are elevated often with the families that we work with. Starting from the very beginning, one of the challenges that we see is if that grandparent caregiver doesn't actually have legal custody or legal guardianship of the child, they may not be able to even enroll the child in school. And so we have a number of resources that help address that issue. There are laws in some states called educational consent laws that can help with that enrollment issue, perhaps why the relative is on their way to seeking guardianship or custody of the child. So that's piece one. And then beyond enrolling, so often schools just aren't thoughtful about using inclusive language in terms of, parents. Sometimes you hear parent and guardian, but making sure that they're reaching out to the relative caregiver, particularly if they don't have legal custody of that child, to make sure that they're asking them to come to be involved in the individual education plan process. For example, if the child has special educational needs that need to be addressed. So really helping schools to be thinking of being more broadly inclusive of family members. And then certainly being familiar with issues of childhood trauma. One of the things we do an annual State of Grand Families report that looks at issues that grand families face, annually looks at the data and how we see trends and changes, and then we hone in on a particular issue. And 2 years ago, we did a report that specifically looked at this issue of trauma and showed how grandparents really play a unique role in reducing and mitigating trauma for children that have to be removed from their parents because of substance use or other issues. And so you really look at, we know a lot from science about protective factors for children that experience trauma, and those relative caregivers really have the characteristics to provide and meet those protective factors for children, but we need to be supporting them in that role. So to the degree that we can really educate schools on the impact of trauma and how they can be supporting that relative in their important role to mitigate trauma is really critical. And those resources are available on our website at gu.org. And I'd like to actually highlight one particular resource that can be found on our website by actually doing a simple search for the phrase grand resource. It's a resource that provides information and help for grand families impacted by opioids and other substance use. And it really highlights a series of tips around 5 topic areas that our grand families that we work with really highlighted as some of the biggest challenges where they didn't have a lot of resources. And those are issues like practicing self-care, addressing childhood trauma, preventing harmful drug use by the children, the grandchildren or the relative children that they're raising, how to engage with the living birth parent, and how to talk to the child about their own birth parent. So that's a resource that may be helpful to your listeners.
Joanne, do you have anything to add to that? I know Carter is still very young. How do you anticipate handling school once she is as of that age?
Fortunately for me, at the current time, I have custody, so she'll be able to go where I live if I still have her then, because, of course, there's always the if. Her dad's been working hard trying to remain clean, and I believe he claims to have a year clean so far. So he's, could at any time try to ask the court to reevaluate what we're doing custody-wise. But I do see in some of the meetings I do with my volunteer work with the state, I've met with the Secretary of Education at a meeting before, and a lot of grandparents who don't have custody orders have that whole problem of enrollment in school. And we've tried to get around some of that with the guardianship, changing our guardianship legislation to assist them with that. But right now I had the only school issue I had was Carter got expelled from daycare last summer. Where I was going to go on vacation without her for the only week a year I go away to be with my cousins in Stone Harbor, New Jersey. And I had my her nephew, who we call her Manny, her uncle Frankie, and his girlfriend were going to stay here and take care of her. But they, of course, both worked and needed her to be in daycare. So she ended up going on my cousin's week vacation with me. And it was kind of a stigmatized reason she got thrown out of daycare was she slapped the teacher in the morning and stomped on the teacher's foot in the afternoon. And because they know her mother's history, they decided there was something wrong with her and they expelled her from their school. And She was 2. So, there's a stigma that follows these kids too. The first question when you fill any form out is, where's the mother, where's the father? And yeah. I'm very open about what happened to my daughter.
Yes.
Some families aren't, but the minute they learn that can stigmatize. They look at anything that child does as a different way, like maybe there's something wrong with her because this is what her parents were doing. So that's the only issues I've had with that. And I subsequently learned it wasn't even legal for the daycare to throw her out because they receive federal funds and they're not allowed to expel children. But there's only so much fight I have in me. So she's at a new daycare where she's extremely happy, and I'm just letting that ship sail because I can only battle so many places at once.
Right,
but that was another trauma that happened to Carter because it's not easy, to have to change and have all new friends. And those are pretty much her friends. I'm 62. I don't know anybody with 3-year-olds except other relatives of mine whose children have children. And sometimes she'll play with their kids if they're in the area. But, that's another thing for grandparents. I'm not as old as many grandparents doing this, but some of the grandparents are in their 40s, so maybe they know younger kids. I don't. So the only real friends she gets to see are at her daycare.
Wow. We only have a few more minutes before we wrap up today's show. And I really, really would like to talk about a call to action strategy, because really, the CDC recently reported that fentanyl has remained the number one drug for which is the cause of overdose deaths in the United States 2 years in a row. The statistics are horrifying. Between 130 to 200 people are dying every day of opioid overdose. We can go on and on and on. This problem is not going to go away anytime soon. And it really, really starts at the grassroots. We have to tell our stories just like you are doing, Joanne, advocating for other families. Jaya, I would love to know, how are people in the network educating lawmakers and other government officials about this crisis? What are some of the things that they are doing to communicate with them?
Absolutely. So we always encourage people to share their stories. Simply to reach out to your legislator and say, I am a grandparent raising my grandchildren, and what are you going to do to help me, goes a long way. Even if you don't have a specific recommendation, the more that they can know that there are constituents that are being faced by this is really important. But on top of that, we do have a couple specific opportunities. I mentioned the Family First Prevention Services Act is recent legislation that was signed into law about a year ago. But many of the opportunities to help grand families in it are up to the state, whether or not they want to take advantage of them. So if you go to grandfamilies.org and click on federal legislation, we have a good amount of information about Family First and some specific ways about how you can raise your voice to make sure that there are services in your state that take advantage of this opportunity with the Family First Act. The other piece that I'll highlight is, again, I mentioned the grand fact sheets at grandfamilies.org, or you can get there directly by going to grandfactsheets.org. If you go and look at those fact sheets, even if you're not a grandparent caregiver yourself, you could find a local program and adopt them. And really look at ways, how can I be helpful to these families? There are a lot of resources out there. Can I provide food for a support group meeting? Or is there, when a family comes and they need a bed because all of a sudden this child came, how can I be a support to a family, is really something to look at. And finally, we are really looking to train more grand family caregivers. We have a national conference that's coming up in June in Portland. So we encourage folks to consider coming to that if that's something of interest. And we also are trying to raise some funds to bring some more caregivers to our conference. And there's information about that at our website and at our Facebook page. So we'd love to be able to bring more caregivers to be able to raise their voices themselves through training at that opportunity.
Perfect. And we have just run out of time. I want to thank you both for being a part of this show. It's highly important, and you were able to educate our listeners today. I would like to thank our listeners for tuning in. You can visit my website at Dynamics in Public Affairs to download an archived copy of this show today. And stay tuned. We look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Grassroots Advocacy Radio, Conversations to educate, empower, and engage with Marcia Padilla-Goad. Tune in the first Tuesday of every month at 12 p.m. Pacific and 3 p.m. Eastern on transformationtalkradio.com as Marcia will continue to educate you on grassroots advocacy and the vital role it plays in the legislative process. For more information or to listen to past shows, visit dynamicsinpublicaffairs.com. That's dynamicsinpublicaffairs.com. See you next time.